So, what happens when a 2,500-year-old pillar of Buddhist philosophy smacks right into a fundamental law of modern physics? I mean, one says everything is constantly changing, while the other says something absolutely essential can never be destroyed. Does Buddhist impermanence just completely blow up the law of energy conservation? Well, today we're going to dive right into this amazing puzzle and see if these two ideas are really at war, or if they're just two different ways of looking at the same incredible reality.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage for this big showdown. Then, and this is super important, we're going to get really clear on what we mean by impermanent and conserved. After that, we'll explore the nature of change itself, and you'll see a pretty cool bridge form between these two worlds. We'll even ask what might actually be permanent. And then, just for fun, we're going to look at a pretty wild idea that challenges the rules of the game altogether. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's set this up. In one corner, you've got the ancient Buddhist teaching of Anicca, the idea of impermanence, and in the other corner, a heavyweight champion of science, the law of conservation of energy. It really does feel like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, doesn't it?
And this right here, this is the heart of the whole question. If absolutely everything is in a state of flux, how can you have something like the total energy of the universe just staying constant, unchanging? It sounds like a paradox, a real head-scratcher. So let's look at exactly what each side is claiming.
Now here it is, laid out plain and simple. On the left, Buddhism says all conditioned things are in flux, they're always changing. On the right, physics says the total energy in a closed system is constant. You can't make it, you can't destroy it. They seem to be saying the exact opposite things. So how on earth do we even begin to sort this out?
Well, like with any good puzzle, the first step is to make sure we're not getting tripped up by the words themselves. To really untangle this, we have to be super precise about what impermanent and conserved actually mean in their own worlds. So let's get our definition straight.
Okay, first up, the physics, the law of conservation of energy. It doesn't say that energy is frozen or static, not at all. It says the total amount is what's constant. And here's the crucial part. It says energy can only be transformed or transferred. It's always on the move, always changing its costume.
Now, let's look at Anicca. This is where it gets really interesting. In Buddhism, impermanence isn't really about things just disappearing or being destroyed. It's about them being in a constant state of becoming something else. It's about that universal feeling we all have, that you just can't keep things exactly the same no matter how hard you try. All right, now that we've got our terms straight, this is where the magic happens. We can start to build a bridge. And what you'll see is that this big conflict, it starts to just melt away when we realize both ideas might actually be describing the exact same process, just from totally different perspectives. Someone in a Reddit discussion put it perfectly. They said, energy is always changing, so energy is impermanent. And that just nails it, right? The law of conservation isn't just compatible with change, it requires it. The whole idea is that energy is constantly shifting its form. That transformation is impermanence in action.
Just think about burning a log. You start with potential chemical energy locked inside the wood. You light it on fire, and that energy doesn't just vanish. Poof, it transforms. It becomes heat and light. The form of the energy is completely impermanent. It's changing moment to moment. But if you could somehow capture all that heat and light and measure it, the total amount of energy would be exactly the same as what you started with.
So here's the big reveal. There is no conflict. Buddhist impermanence is the perfect way to describe what's happening to the forms of energy. They arise, they change, they fade. And the law of conservation? It's describing the total quantity of that energy, which stays the same through all that change. They're talking about two different things. It's a beautiful way to see the world as both constant and ever-changing all at the same time. But wait, it gets even cooler, because there's another layer to this from the Buddhist side that makes this whole thing even clearer. It shows just how incredibly nuanced this ancient way of thinking really is. It's a super common misunderstanding. A lot of us think the Buddha just said, yep, everything is impermanent, full stop. But that's not actually what the teachings say. They're way more specific. And that little bit of precision, well, it changes everything.
And here's the key, in one single word: conditioned. The teaching is that all conditioned things are impermanent. So what's a conditioned thing? Basically, it's anything that exists because of other causes and conditions. Think about a cloud, or a thought, or even the chemical energy in that log. They all depend on other stuff to exist. And because of that, they're always in a state of flux.
But, and here's the kicker, Buddhist philosophy also talks about things that are unconditioned, things that don't depend on other causes to be what they are. The ultimate state of freedom, nirvana, is one of them. But look at that second one. The laws of nature themselves are considered unconditioned, and therefore permanent.
So now look at how this all snaps together. Anicca, or impermanence, applies to conditioned things, like the changing forms of energy. The law of conservation, in this way of thinking, is like an unconditioned principle that describes the total. They're not in conflict because they're operating on totally different levels of reality. Pretty neat, huh?
Okay, but just when we think we've got it all figured out, let's have some fun and throw a wrench in the works. There's a perspective from a field sometimes called new energy science that challenges the very scientific law we've been working so hard to understand.
Now, this is a more speculative idea, for sure, but it basically says our standard model of the universe is just incomplete. It argues that the law of conservation of energy really only works if you have a closed system. But what if our universe isn't a closed box? What if it's wide open? The conventional view sees our universe as a closed system with 4 dimensions. The total energy inside that box is constant. But this other view suggests that our reality might be part of a much bigger, multi-dimensional system. If that's true, maybe energy is flowing in and out of our universe all the time from these other dimensions. And if that's happening, the total energy in our little slice of reality wouldn't be constant at all.
There's a quote often attributed to Einstein that kind of playfully gets at this idea. It reframes the universe not as some closed box with limited stuff inside, but as an infinitely abundant open system. One huge free lunch. It's a mind-bending thought for sure.
Whew, okay, so we've looked at ancient philosophy, modern physics, and even some pretty out-there science. So where does all this leave us? Let's bring it all home.
That big clash we started with, it was really just a misunderstanding. Buddhism's concept of Anicca is describing our lived experience of a world where everything is in flux. It's about the nature of conditioned things. Physics' law of conservation is describing an objective principle about the total amount of energy. They're not fighting, they're describing reality from different zoom levels.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Are science and ancient wisdom really opposing truths? Or are they maybe just different languages, using different tools, trying their best to describe the same, deeply mysterious, and absolutely incredible reality that we all share? What do you think?